This opportunity combines my two favorite things in the entire world. So being the first speaker at the first annual meeting of the Polish American Libraries Association, very important to me. It combines libraries and Poland, the two biggest things in my life. So I want to say dziękuję bardzo, and I would like to say dzień dobry I witam was serdecznie. Although I have met many of you informally, I'm grateful for this opportunity, and in preparing to speak to you today, I decided that my job should be to help you answer this question. It's a question that you will be asked, if you haven't been asked already. And I noted that when our members appeared on Polvision recently, and I hope you saw that on the website or on television, that was the first question that came out of the interviewer's mouth was, why do we need a Polish Librarians Association in the United States? Well, let me start to try to help you answer that question by telling you something about myself. I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and unlike many Polish Americans in the Midwest who lived in Chicago and Cleveland and Detroit and so forth, I was not surrounded by Polish culture. I lived in a decidedly white, Anglo-Saxon Protestant community, and the only thing Polish in my world was babcia. And I called my babcia Busha.
All right.
She was my mother's mother, and she looked after me on a 40-acre farm while my mother worked in a bakery in Hamtramck and came home on weekends. The first thing that I learned about being Polish was that it meant being poor. The second thing I learned about being Polish was that it meant being Catholic. And in our community, ground was broken for the construction of the first Catholic church in Armada, Michigan, on August 24th, 1947, the day before I was born. The other thing that I learned for sure about being Polish was that it meant eating lots of gołąbki, pierogi, kielbasa, and chruściki. For almost 40 years, I learned little more than that about my ethnic heritage, except for what I would call pidgin Polish that I spoke with my grandmother. Mostly that meant her speaking Polish and me answering in English. My mother and her 6 brothers and sisters were far too busy becoming American and trying to make ends meet to really worry about Polish culture. Even though I sometimes claim to have been born a librarian, it never occurred to me in those days to read a book about Poland until many years later, after my grandmother died. In my 30s, I began to ask myself why I had not listened more, why I had not made any kind of record of what she told me about her journey to America in 1913. I made my first trip to Poland in 1981 as a summer school student with the Kościuszko Foundation. My eyes were beginning to open, but just beginning. I went back to Poland in 1988 with my mother, and even though we never spoke Polish at home, the language came back to her immediately, and I let her do all the talking on that trip. My mother spoke English with that delightful accent that was later made famous by the guys on Saturday Night Live, as in doubles. And I later came to understand, too late of course to tell her, that I did appreciate what it must have been like for her on her first day of school, walking into a class in Centerline, Michigan, and not knowing how to speak English. My mother's first language was not English, but she never seemed to think that anybody owed her any special consideration because of that. She was part of the greatest generation, as it's come to be called, that just sucked it up and got on with it. And that meant getting on with the business of becoming American. Although I credit the wonderful librarians and teachers I had in Armada, Michigan, for instilling in me the great gift of curiosity, There was no doubt in my mind that my job as a Polish American was to be American, and Polish had little to do with it. Polish Americans around the world, I think, have assimilated extremely well. I have 23 first cousins, for example, on my mother's side of the family. And the girls started out with maiden names like Brodacki, Jakubicki, and Mishuk. Now their names are Cindy Williams, Margie Costas, Barbara Myers, and Connie Miller, and so on. So the ethnicity does not live on in the name necessarily, nor can it rest entirely on a taste for kielbasa and kishka. The stated mission of the Polish American Librarians Association, as you have heard, is to positively impact services provided to library patrons of Polish descent and individuals interested in Polish culture. But why do we need a Polish American Librarians Association any more than we need a French American Librarians Association or an Italian Librarians Association? Well, let me try to give you some reasons, 5 of them, that I came up with when I was trying to prepare to talk to you today. Number 1, I think the story of the Polish diaspora is largely untold, especially in America. Our general lack of knowledge and history and geography notwithstanding, when I went to Poland to look for my roots in 2000, I had a few photographs, a couple of letters, and a ship's manifest from the National Archives. The rest that I knew about my heritage was pretty much oral history, my family history. And during that trip, I discovered that I had cousins in England, Germany, France, Australia, and Canada. Another aspect of the Polish diaspora that is extremely important for our organization is that it is now reversing itself. And I think this is a very serious point to be made for our organization, our new organization. That is, what I'm trying to say is that as my Polish cousin says, the flights to Warsaw are all full and they're having trouble filling the flights coming to the United States. In the Polish community in Chicago, there was a cover story in the Chicago Tribune magazine section about this, about the reversal, about so many people returning to Poland. The implications, I think, of this phenomenon and what is happening in the Polish economy are mind-boggling for organizations that are serving the immigrant community in the United States, as well as organizations that are preserving Polish history. Number 2 reason, technology is changing the way we librarians do our jobs, but more importantly, I think it's changing the way people read. New generations are French. It means understanding why Poles were fully in the orbit of Western European culture as early as 1333 under the rule of Casimir the Great. It means knowing that nearly 500 years ago, Poland was the first nation in Europe to establish religious freedom constitutionally for Eastern Orthodoxy, Islam, Judaism, and even Protestants. It means understanding that we are descended from this tribe, and we have every bit as much to be proud of, in fact, perhaps more, than any other people on earth. And with the passing years, I have realized that I learned a great deal more about being Polish from my busha than I ever could have understood in my youth. Her wisdom echoes in my mind today. The wisdom of a woman who left her native land as a young girl and never saw her parents again. And what I remember most about her is her kindness and her sense that every life has equal value and that all people have the right to lead healthy and productive lives, and that all people are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among them the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These beliefs, I learned from her, are fundamentally Polish. How many of our patrons know this? We have our work cut out for us. We have a professional role to play. And we can best play it by doing everything we can to make sure that our stories are told and preserved and read and understood. Dziękuję bardzo.
We truly enjoy it. Leonard, I know that you are going to France. It's for a taste, a good French champagne. Thank you. Leonard told us